Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this week's episode of Behind the Story. I'm Eli Sherman. This week, I'm joined by my co-host, Dan McGowan of the Boston Globe RI, and our guest this week is the one and only Ethan Shorey of the Valley Breeze. Ethan, welcome to the show.
How are you? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we wanted to have you on this week because it just feels like there's been so much news in recent months, but definitely over the last few years coming out of Pawtucket. You have been covering Pawtucket forever. I won't date you. I'll let you do that yourself.
09.
09, right? You came out with the Pawtucket edition, right? And so, you know the city very well. We sort of come in and out when we're reporting on it, but you've got great handle on the beat. And I wanted to start the conversation about talking about Centerville Bank Stadium, the new stadium for Rhode Island FC, which of course started playing their games in the spring. And I want to just start by asking you how you feel it's been going and how, if at all, it's surprised you and how it's affecting the city.
Yeah, I think I've been surprised at the level of excitement right out of the gate, and I don't know if it's totally translated into attendance just yet because of maybe some of the parking issues and issues with getting to the game. I do think that will work itself out over time. But I think they've shown that the fireworks nights are huge, and the 4th of July, kind of like the Paw Sox were realizing toward the end of their time, like, we need to make this more of an experience that the whole family can enjoy before the game, during the game, after the game. It's not just about the game. And I think more of that will develop over time. But I haven't talked to anybody there to know yet just what they think of the attendance, but I think they're pretty happy overall.
Yeah, I think I saw it's a blogger, but he's very juiced in with the Championship League. Is it USL? Is that?
Yeah.
I always forget ULS or USL.
Yeah.
And he had the average attendance so far at Centerville Bank Stadium at 8,600 about.
Yeah.
And some of those days it was like, the capacity, as we know, is about 10,500. And he pegged it, dropping as low as into the 7,000s, but some days it actually even exceeding capacity. So,
Yeah.
I think robust so far is a good way to measure it, as long as those numbers are correct. I haven't checked with the team themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Paw Sox had way more games, but they also had they had a lot of nights with 3,000 or 4,000 toward the end, and so I think you're seeing a lot more. I notice a lot more Pawtucket residents there than I used to. I think the Paw Sox used to get a lot of outsiders coming for a summertime game. Within the city itself, I think it's being embraced perhaps more than the Paw Sox were at the end. Baseball, I think it's a difference between soccer and baseball. Really,
you know what one of the big changes that I think is really stunning to people, and it should sound obvious, but we all went to Paw Sox games, at McCoy. I can't remember the last time I paid for a ticket to go to McCoy.
Yeah,
I
there's a lot of giveaways.
A lot of giveaways. And so I think, you hear from people when you go to the games. I was at the Hartford game. I went to the opening night. I've been to a couple of the games and big attendance nights. I've been to the ones where there's been.
Well, we went to the opening day together, Dan.
Exactly. And it was sold out or close to sold out. What you hear from people is say, boy, it's really expensive. And I'm always thinking, well, yeah, because if you paid for your ticket, it seems like that's one that and that's what they need to make it work, right? You have to pay for your ticket in order for them to be able to pay for the stadium.
And they need to make it the full experience. So, and I said it for a long time, and it was part of the whole debate of should we spend all this money on it? And I said, and maybe I shouldn't say this as a journalist, but I think they could have spent more on it, and it still would have been worth it. Because as a young family, I'm not that young, but my children are pretty young, and there was not much to do in Rhode Island a few years ago. Now there's quite a bit to do. Like, I can go to the Pinball Museum in Pawtucket and spend $10 per kid and stay for 5 hours. I can go to a game. I can go to the beach is always here, but there's more food offerings, it seems like, all the time. There's a lot more to do now than there used to be, and that's worth a lot to young families, especially a lot of, like Cumberland, where I live, has had a massive amount of turnover. A lot of young families come in, they're looking for something to do, and they don't want to spend a ton of money. And even though it is kind of expensive, it's still a lot cheaper than a lot of what you can do out there. Go to a regular arcade and with a few kids, and you can find out.
And by the way, try to go to Gillette. It's
Yeah.
for a soccer game. It's a a lot
And
of money.
everything's expensive. Yeah.
Do you find you mentioned before the figuring out some of the issues around parking? There, it's no secret. When if anyone who goes to the game, if you're parking anywhere around the stadium, it can be a little bit confusing.
Yeah.
I'm curious from your perspective as sort of a local journalist and really understanding the area that the stadium is around. Are you hearing from residents who don't like the idea that people are parking in their neighborhoods, taking their parking spots, things like that?
The immediate neighborhood is pretty upset, I would say, and there's still a lot of parking in front of my house, too much traffic, because they're not used to it. I think there will be a little bit of getting used to it, but they also need to figure out. I think they will buy some more properties for parking. I don't know what the prospects are of that power station right next door, but if they could ever move that, that would be a great spot for more parking, parking garage, all sorts of things. But their point is you can walk a little way to get to an event, and that's what you got to do in a lot of cities. So get used to it.
One of the things that I've been struck by, I've written a little bit about this, but when you talk to the people who are most bullish about Pawtucket, you talk to someone like Dan Sullivan at Colette or Allison Bologna, right? People who just really love Pawtucket. They exude excitement about the place.
I love Pawtucket.
I
always have.
And you're like this too. No, and you've been like this for a long time. I'm curious though. Do you? What a lot of the conversation seems to be is whenever I've before the stadium opened, doing little tours of that area and things. A lot of it was like, imagine what this could be.
Yeah.
Imagine if we get a restaurant. Do you see prospects for that actually happening? Like, what is that area going to look like 5 years from now?
Yes, they need to be very careful about it all being residential.
Such a good point. Yeah.
Right now, there's a lot of residential, hundreds, even thousands of developed residential units coming in. Right, there's actually, in addition to the mills being filled up, there's the ones going up from the ground right next to the train station. There's one called Short Line Apartments or something, like the Short Line in Monopoly. Right on the other side of the train tracks, right next to the train station. So there's a lot going on in there right now. I did write in my story today that the one right next to the train station is going to have commercial on the first floor, 1,300 square feet, and then I believe the one diagonally across from that one is also going to have commercial on the first floor, like 2 storefronts. So I think that's really important. You want to, and Eric from, I forget his last name, from ZDS Architecture is doing a ton of these projects all over the area. Lincoln, Cumberland, I'm sure points south too, but Pawtucket especially. And he's talking a lot about, he's doing the East Avenue one too, which is kind of near the stadium as well. So that whole area, the train station and the stadium, have changed everything. Developers are pouncing on every little parcel.
And just so that we're clear, and correct me if I'm wrong here, this is all separate from what the developers of the Fortuitous Partners had planned to do on the other side of the Seekonk River when they came in proposing to build this building, right? This is all residential
separate
development that's just happening.
It's all happening naturally, and if you were there 5 years ago, you saw concrete and weeds, and the difference, and both in the stadium and that was polluted too, but and where the train station is, and it's completely changed the area.
Okay, well, we got to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about housing and sort of the long-term future of Pawtucket, and then we'll also get into a little bit of politics. So stick with us. Welcome back to Behind the Story. I'm Eli Sherman, joined today by my co-host, Dan McGowan of the Boston Globe, and we're talking with Ethan Shorey, chief editor of the Valley Breeze. Ethan, we just left off in the last segment talking a little bit about all this housing that's going up, and I think you said it well. There are just all these different projects that are sort of popping up nearby, if not directly abutting the new Pawtucket Central Falls Transit Hub, the new train station that was open there in 2023, I think. And I'm wondering, and you sort of alluded to it in one of your answers, but do you feel like Pawtucket's having a bit of a housing boom, and we obviously are in a bit of a housing crisis throughout the state. Is there a potential here that there maybe is too much residential building going on from your perspective, or is this exactly what the city needs to revitalize itself, which is the buzzword that so many people like to use?
Yeah, I think an important thing will be not only the commercial but also affordable components. And there were a few years ago they tried, some people tried to get an affordable requirement before what they knew was coming next to the train station, and that was sort of shot down. But there's a lot of
was that like a NIMBYism, not my backyard type
the
thing?
council really wasn't a fan of requiring it of developers. It's very developer friendly council. It is what it is. But as a result, there's a lot of market rate housing coming in. Aurora Lee and the crew that's doing a lot of the projects tends to have a lot more affordable aspects, and it's not even required, but they don't take many subsidies either, other than like the tax treaty with the city. They really don't get many subsidies, which was her point in one of my stories today, as the people from 71 Dexter Street complained about why are we being held to these design standards and there's certain traffic review. And she's like, well, you guys are getting all kinds of subsidies. You guys can afford underground parking, and you can afford this and that. So there's a little friction right now between some of the developers, I think, partially because they're competing for the same people to be tenants, and partially because they want the traffic to flow in and out of their place well. And that was the guy from Lee Pizer from 71 Dexter Street was saying that, like, I'm worried about traffic safety for pedestrians. This area really isn't ready for what's coming when everybody moves in. And it's really not. It's a crazy intersection nearby. And Rhode Island in general just isn't really built for pedestrians. I don't walk much for that reason.
Well, I wonder if I think I'm hearing it, but is there a concern, at least at some of these places, that the rent is going to be pretty expensive, and that may change sort of the makeup of rental properties in Pawtucket, because historically it's been a potentially more affordable community to live in than some other parts of the state?
To a degree, I think rents are already pretty high, and I'm not totally convinced that the $2,000 rent near the train station, or $2,400, is going to make the 3-story tenement a half mile up the street that much more expensive, because they're two totally different people. One's a commuter, one's somebody who's working up the street, generally speaking. And so, but at the same time, people are like, all right, do we want to have all Boston commuters here who don't understand the area? That said, we talk about Boston commuters like they don't want to be part of the community, but I was talking for a story last week with the Rhode Island Spirit folks, and they were saying we have people come in all the time, and they love that there's a neighborhood place here that stays open late now. So, so they've seen they're open till 11, which Pawtucket has lacked a late night spot for a long time, and I think they're benefiting from that and from all the new residents moving in. I think somebody or a few people need to have a real plan for how it's all going to work out, though, with traffic, with how
there may be some growing pains.
How all the developments work together, pedestrians.
We were talking in the last segment about you've been covering Pawtucket since 2009, so you have covered the entire Grabbian administration, right? He gets elected in 2010. Had a relatively competitive race in 2010 that we won somewhat comfortably against Henry Kinch, but has largely not had a serious race since. We now know that Adam Greenman has announced that he's going to challenge Mayor Grabbian. Handicap that race well out before it gets serious.
Sure.
Do we think Greenman actually has a real chance to compete in this race?
It's always hard to say. There have been times in the past where I was like, wow, this person's really impressive. But when you're going up against an established, not necessarily in Pawtucket, but when you're going up against established Democrat in Rhode Island, in my experience, you can look at Kristen Catanzaro in North Providence. A lot of people thought she was going to upset Lombardi, and I think he won by 20 points.
Right.
and she had a big rat issue at the time that people were making even bigger than it was. It was pretty big, and but
Rat's a rat.
but I think you almost one ran by me the other day, and it was like a cat. Not at my house, to be clear. But you need almost 2 or 3 big issues and a widespread dissatisfaction to have any chance. There is some of that, I think, right now. It will depend on how serious people think of those issues, like traffic tickets, traffic camera tickets, development, getting price out of the community. And some of that, I think, has yet to be seen. We're still quite a ways out from. So depending on what things are like next year with the economy, and the national economy, as you know, always plays a role on the local level too. Like incumbents, get rid of them.
Well, and there's a big, the interesting thing that with Adam Greenman that I noticed, and I've known him a little while, interviewed him, ahead of his announcement. I do wonder if he's almost too nice of a guy to run the race that you need to win against an incumbent Democrat. And my point about that is to what you were saying. You got to run the race that's like, you're killing us on our housing. Everyone's getting traffic tickets all the time. It seems like Adam, and understandably so, kudos to him in some ways, wants to have this policy conversation. We need to fix the schools, which is important, but is a very difficult thing to get your heads around. I'm not sure the voters necessarily blame Mayor Grebian for the schools problems, things like that. So, but I'm curious, are you picking up what I'm putting down?
I am, yeah. Likability, though, is a huge deal. There have been a lot of candidates that I've seen in 19 years that I've been doing this. So I wish I hadn't said that.
That was me allowing you to do yourself.
You had more hair then, too. Me too.
A lot skinnier, too. What was I saying again?
The likability.
The likability, yeah. And a lot of people who had great points, but just people didn't like them. So he is likable. And he's taken some shots already. So I don't necessarily think he's opposed to taking shots. It will be interesting with the length of this campaign because people usually announce a lot later. If he sort of reaches a peak too early, but how he balances that being a nice guy, but also not just picking up, like some candidates in the past have picked up really tiny issues based in a neighborhood and thought they were a lot bigger than they were, and that a lot more people cared than did. So he's going to have to find some really big issues that a lot of people care about.
Or some really big rats.
Some really big rats. And I imagine that stadium costs and housing and all of that is probably going to come up in a big way, with both sides saying that, they probably have it right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have, Ethan. Everybody should go pick up the Valley Breeze, check out their website, read his work and his team. They do a great job. Ethan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for
having me.
That was
great, Ethan. Thanks.
Appreciate
it. When we come back, we'll be talking about a recurring segment we call The Stories We Wish We Wrote. Stick with us. Hello, welcome back to Behind the Story. I'm Eli Sherman. I'm here with my co-host, Dan McGowan of the Boston Globe. And now we're going to be talking about my favorite recurring segment, our only recurring segment, the Stories We Wish We Wrote, where we talk about some of the other stories that have been happening around the region that caught our eyes. So I'll start with you, Dan. What'd you like?
Well, before we do it, I have to give you major kudos because we just had Ethan Shorey on, and the Valley Breeze did its Voices of the Valley awards, and Channel 12 or WPRI won the best TV station in no small part to you. I think I give you lots of credit. So congratulations.
Yeah, no, it was great. I was surprised to see it. Actually, I didn't even know it was happening before I asked Ethan.
Yeah, this was not pay for play.
We have a lot of really, really really great people here at WPRI. So it's nice to get that type of recognition.
The story I wish I wrote this week was by Johnny Williams in the Providence Journal. He's been covering, and a lot of people have been paying close attention. You have too, Eli, to some of the cuts and some of the financial problems that Brown Health has been having. And I think a lot of headlines initially came out about what's going on in Newport, where they're considering closing a birthing center.
Mm-hmm.
But Johnny Williams points out in this story that there's a lot of other cuts potentially on the table. The Gateway Health for behavioral health. There's a dental clinic that's potentially on the chopping block. And what's interesting about this, I think what advocates are finding is, you always want to be the loudest voice in the room, and so Newport had that initial success, but it's going to be interesting to see some of these other really important programs that Brown Health offers, and how they're going to be able to stay afloat if Brown Health really kind of can't come through with money for them.
Yeah, an interesting thing I think we've been seeing in the healthcare system is that a lot of these organizations did these partnerships with other entities as a sort of a plug and play situation.
Yeah, to stay afloat.
Yeah. It was cheaper. And now, facing all of these financial headwinds, they're actually, examining whether or not they need to cut them, which then the service goes away because you don't have it in-house. So I got a couple I just got to run through before we got to get out of here. But one is a very quirky, awesome story that the East Bay RI Bristol Phoenix did, and it's called 50 Years Ago, A Terrible Accident and a Friend Lost. And it's written by Manny Carrera, and it's about Roger Arroyo, and I hope I'm saying his name right, but he was this amazing softball athlete 50 years ago, and just was thought so highly of as an athlete. And it's all these people remembering him. He died tragically in an accident. But it's fun to just see sort of these really local stories come out of newspapers that, I had no idea who this person is, living in Providence. So it was great to read, nicely done. The other one is a column that you did just today.
Wow, we're just really
just going back
patting each other on the back.
But he did a really good story, column about examining the WNBAs, the Connecticut Sun, who are considering whether or not to sell and relocate the team. Providence has been floating has been pushing to potentially be home court for that at the AMP. Dan did a really good column of, sort of calling on leaders to get together and come up with a proposal for them. We're going to have other stories that we're going to put on our website because we had a lot more to get through that we can't. But unfortunately, that is all the time that we have this week. For people who want to see these full episodes, you can find them on our website, WPRI.com. You can also find them on YouTube. And now we have this as a podcast, which you can find on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere that you get your podcasts. But join us next week. We'll have another guest on. For Dan McGowan, I'm Eli Sherman. Thanks for watching Behind the Story.